Hi, so I'm going to have a go at making a Limut tutorial. So let's start off just with a quick guide to the user interface. I've just gone full screen there from the web browser. So the big slider at the top is volume, overall sort of system volume. We've got a display here of the current beat and also some readouts for where we are through different length phrases, which can be useful for getting timing right on changes you make into the music. This button plays the music, it basically runs the code. This stops any current selection of sounds and events from playing. This comments in or out current line of code, and this is to toggle full screen, and we've got some indicators here for whether the system is sort of running smoothly. If they go red, then it will usually indicate some sort of problem. So I'm going to try and make a tutorial by putting together some sort of basic synthwave and sort of explaining as I'm going what I'm doing. So you can see I've got the webcam set up here, which is why you can see me. We might play with that a bit later. But I'm going to start just with, let's set a BPM a little bit faster than the default. The default is 110. As soon as I run the code, instead of pressing the button up here, there, by the way, I hit Control Enter, which runs the code. We're now running the beats through slightly faster. Let's set something up. Let's have a nice classic synthwave sort of Prophet sound. So this is a detuned pulse synthesizer with an LFO controlling the pulse width. It's a classic sort of 80s sound. So you can hear the pulse width modulation rolling through as the LFO acts on the note. So that's got us something, not terribly exciting, but at least we've got some noise. I'm going to make it a bit more synthwave by making it wobble a bit. So this is your classic 80s tape sound. So there's a parameter here which is called add C, which is a sort of continuous add to the frequency, the pitch of the note, and this is in semitones. There's a predefined variable called wow, which sort of simulates the wow effect from a cassette tape. So you can hear now the sound's got a little bit of wobble to it, which just is a bit more reminiscent of the sort of analog tape or videotape from 80s, which is good for synthwave. So the overall structure of what we're doing here, this is the name of this particular player. This is the name of the synth we're using, which is a predefined synthesizer called Prophet, which, as I say, is a detuned pulse wave. This is the pattern of notes we're playing. This is a parameter which sets the duration as 4 beats, so each note, each event in this pattern takes 4 beats, and then additional parameters come on the end. So let's mix it up a little bit. Let's turn it into a bit of an arpeggio. So you can see as soon as we update the code, it runs all the code. So this is somewhere Limut's a little different to a lot of other live coding environments. When you run the code, it doesn't just run what's under your cursor, it runs the entire block of everything you've got there. That's quite handy because it means that everything gets updated at once. If you want to update multiple things, you can make all the changes and then just update and it runs the whole lot. So this is cool. A little bit slow. Let's maybe mix it up a bit. Let's maybe so we've got a little bit something more like a melody or a riff there. The square brackets in this pattern are showing that that's playing both of those events within the space, within the time that would normally be taken by one event. So we've got one event there of duration 2, and then another event here of duration 2, and then another and another. The numbers that are here are the pitch value, which is on a diatonic scale, so the default is major. So if I write this, it has no effect because we're already in the major scale. If I turn it to a minor scale, it'll sound a little bit different. So you can hear we now have a minor second, so we've made things a little bit more minor sounding and interesting. So that's a pretty basic start. Let's get some percussion going. So I'm going to have a kick drum, really basic. So the play synth is for playing samples. The samples that we have are basically the same ones that Foxtrot has. It's they're just ripped off of Foxtrot. So there's a few different bass drum sounds that we can have. So look, we'll just go back to that. There are different banks of samples as well, which you can set with the sample parameter. Slightly different version there. This is also a pattern, but instead of the note within the scale, this is the sample that you want to play. So for example, we could play a snare drum after that. That's not very synthwave. What this does is the default duration for the play synth is actually a half of a beat. So that's actually one whole beat between those two parts of the pattern. The dot just means a rest, it means do nothing. So this is playing the bass drum on the first half of each beat and then doing nothing on the second half of each beat. So overall each beat we're just playing bang, square, bass drum, 4 on the floor. So if we want to add a snare drum with a classic sort of backbeat pattern, we can do this. So we've now got bass drum on every beat, and then every other beat, every backbeat, there's the snare drum playing. So we can make things a bit more interesting as well. We could, sorry, messing things up. There we go. We could set an echo. Still messing things up. There we go. We could set an echo on this. Set it something a bit in between so it sounds more interesting. So that's already starting to build up a more interesting pattern as the snare drum plays against its own echoes. We could also add some reverberation. So that makes the bass drum sound a lot bigger. So I think next we should have some visuals, shouldn't we? So let's have a vaguely synth-wavy sort of background. I have a visual synth called Lines. So if I put that on, you can see that's just playing a sort of pattern of lines in the background. Looks vaguely synth-wavy. We could also have a grid background, maybe. So that's probably not working because Lines is overwriting it. Yeah, there we go. So we've made Lines additive, which means that it's adding the colours on top of the ones underneath. So the grid's red, which isn't very exciting. I'm going to change the foreground colour to, I don't know, this is probably more synthwave, isn't it? Let's have neon pink. Definitely a bit more like it. So, by the way, this additive parameter, where there's a parameter with no value set, it's the same as if it's set to 1. It just assumes if you haven't specified it, you want it set to 1. So that's good for sort of turning on effects where 1 equals do it, which is a bit like what we've got with additive. So I'm getting really, really tired of this line now. Let's throw a chord sequence in. So I'm going to make a variable called chords, and we'll have some really simple chords which I'm just throwing together, and then we can use the add parameter. So I'll explain the difference between add and add C in a moment, but if we set add equals chords, see, as soon as I hit that update it immediately started changing what it was playing. So that's where you might want to use these values to make sure you only do the update on every 4 bars or every 8 bars or something like that. And then you can get it lined up exactly on the point where you want it to change. So the add C is add continuous, which means you can use fractions of a semitone, fractions of a note, but add is always an integer change, so it's always within the current scale. So we're currently within a minor scale, so if I do add equals 0, we go back to what we originally had because it's adding 0 onto all the notes. If I do add equals 1, we're now on the second degree of the scale, so it's not added one semitone, it's moved the whole pattern up by one note within the diatonic scale, so it's now centered on the first note of the scale instead of the bass one, the root one. And that's what chords is doing. So what we have here is this pattern. So this is saying take a sequence here, which is 0, 2, 1 and then 3, and it's a timed sequence. So each of these values lasts for 8 beats. So the value of chords, if you evaluate it, will be 0 for the first 8 beats, and then 2 for the next 8 beats, and then 1 for the next 8 beats, and so on. So that's now defining a time sequence, and you can hear that in this Prophet player, which is now changing where the melody is pitched within the scale according to that chord sequence. So I think the next thing we need is a bit of a bass. So let's have a detuned bass. So this is a detuned saw. So if I just play it, so it's quite fat and growly. So we can take away some of that growl by maybe setting a low pass filter. So LPF is low pass filter. So we've taken away some of the high end of that. What we haven't done though is set the chords on it, so let's just add the chords in. It's also not terribly exciting, just played on every note, so let's change the duration to every quarter of a beat. So we're actually going to play four notes within each beat, which is quite fast. So that's got a bit more of a drive to it. We can give it even more of a kick by shortening the attack. The default attack is sort of medium, but we can shorten it quite low. That gives it more of a punch when it's coming in. And we can also, if we want to, shorten the sustain. So if I drop that down to an 1/8, then it's much more staccato now. Whether that's something we want to do or not is another matter. Now we can do something interesting with the low pass filter. At the moment we've just used it to sort of round the sound off a little bit and make it a bit less bright, make it more of a bass sound. But we can actually roll that around. So if I have it change between 500 and 1000, so these are frequency values. I'm actually about to add a parameter called this.freq, which will give you the actual frequency the note is playing at. So if you're using the frequency values, that's frequencies in hertz or cycles per second. So I'm going to use L8 on that. So what you should hear is that the low pass filter is actually changing the cutoff, and the L means linear interpolation, so it takes 8 beats to interpolate from this 500 to this 1000. So I think we could take it a bit further, and I think we might try upping the low pass resonance a bit, make it a bit more. Don't want to take it too far, else we'll have an acid house bass instead. That might be a bit far for synthwave. There we go, that just accentuates it a little bit. Now we've taken the sustain down that far, it might be worth popping the release up a little bit as well. So that's cool. I'm finding the main line a bit repetitive, so I can just comment that out. We'll just lose that for a moment. So I just use Control and Slash there, which comments the line in or out, which is very convenient because you can very quickly comment out a bunch of lines and then pop them back in. So you can actually sort of it's very coarse grained, but you can do a sort of coarse grained mix on the music quite easily that way. What's happening right now though is that percussion is sounding really boring. So let's start with something more like a hi-hat. There's a hi-hat on hyphen, but it's quite quiet. There's probably also one on colon that's decent. Let's try that, and we'll stick an echo on it. and probably turn the amp down, which is the amplitude, is like the volume, so it's just making it a bit quieter. We'll set it to half and see how it sounds. So that's alright, we can go a bit faster. Yeah, that's got a bit more of a drive to it. So I'm inclined now to maybe swap some of these visuals around a little bit as well. So let's have a street lights. There we go. So that sounds a little bit more like it, doesn't it? We've got a little bit more outrun there. What ones do we want? Well, it's not wildly exciting, is it? But while we're at it, we can maybe pop a few other things. Let's have this. Should we turn it into a tunnel? That's always fun. So I'm just zooming it out a bit to make the tunnel more obvious, and we can also stick some scroll on it to... Oh, that's a bit fast, isn't it? That's a bit slow. So that's kind of cool. We're actually scrolling. The scroll parameter really takes something that looks like this with a value for X and a value for Y. So if I do that, that's just a fixed scroll in X and Y. But if I use a single value, time is just a number, it's just the beat number counting up. So if I use a single number, it will be applied to both X and Y. So this is the time divided by 20, and that's the scroll for X and Y. So if I use that, the way the tunnel works is that's now going to zoom us into the tunnel and rotate it as we go. The tunnel is just it just modifies the pixel coordinates to make things look like they're in a tunnel. So for example, if I do it to lines, then the lines get rotated and warped as if they were themselves in a tunnel. I don't really want that for the lines, although it is kind of cool. Actually, I kind of like that, maybe we'll leave that. Not sure we want the street light though in that case. Yeah, I like that, that's cool. I think we want something a bit more whoopy though. Let's see what we can have as a sort of more high-pitched thing with maybe a bit of vibrato, maybe a bit space sounding. This first thing is the name for the player, by the way. You need to have a name, but it doesn't really matter what it is. If you want to refer to the player from another player, then that's what you use, so it's important to have it. But so let's have one of these. Let's stick some vibrato on, see what it sounds like. Kind of cool. Maybe a bit louder. I think this Prophet's a little bit boring. Let's maybe stick some echo on it. It's not really helping very much, is it? Let's stick a low pass filter on it. What we'll do is we'll use one. So this is where we've had T for time intervals and L for linearly interpolating between time intervals. This is going to be within the note itself. So if I started off at 100, expanded out to 1000, and then bring it back down, that may not be enough actually. So we're now applying that filter within the note. You can hear the Prophets change. So if I just get rid of the other instruments, if we turn up the resonance, it'll probably sound even a bit cheesy. So that's probably too much. And the other thing we can do is we can have this value change over time if we want. So for example, we can have this go from so that can vary. So what we now have is each note will start on a filter at 700 and then open up to this filter, which is going to vary how far it's going to open up over time, and then it's going to drop back down again. See, again, you can mix things in, so you can have a you can set yourself up with a bit of a drop and that kind of thing just by commenting things out really easily. Yeah, not very exciting, but you get the idea. So yeah, I think that'll about do. Hopefully you get some of the gist. Let's see what we can cook up just to finish this off. Right, yeah, cool, cheers.